a poor girl accepts the elderly woman everyone hates, not knowing she's the CEO's mother. Imagine walking into a bustling Manhattan cafe, the kind where everyone seems to be dressed in expensive suits and polished shoes. Now picture yourself as someone who doesn't quite fit in, wearing secondhand clothes, nursing the cheapest coffee on the menu, and scrolling through endless job applications on your laptop. That's Sophie Reed, a young woman with big dreams, but an even bigger mountain of student debt. Her life feels like it's at a standstill until one morning when she notices an elderly woman being treated like an outcast by everyone around her. The whispers, the cold stares, the deliberate avoidance, it all makes Sophie uncomfortable. But what happens next changes everything. Against societal judgment and her own fears, Sophie decides to stand up for this stranger. Little does she know, the frail, ostracized woman is none other than Eleanor Whitmore, the mother of Alexander Whitmore, CEO of one of the most prestigious companies in the city. What starts as a simple act of kindness spirals into a story of secrets, betrayal, and choices that will test Sophie's integrity in ways she never imagined. The cafe scene sets the stage perfectly. Eleanor Whitmore walks in, her silver hair catching the light, her posture stooped under the weight of years, and perhaps something more. She's greeted with barely concealed disdain by those around her. The barista forces a smile. Patrons exchange knowing looks, or pointedly avoid eye contact. It's clear Eleanor is no ordinary customer. When a businessman rudely demands she move from his table because he has a meeting, Sophie finds herself speaking up before she can think twice. "There are no assigned seats here," she says firmly, surprising even herself. This moment becomes the catalyst for their unlikely friendship. Eleanor thanks Sophie with watery blue eyes, her voice trembling, yet carrying traces of its former authority. As they talk, Sophie learns bits and pieces about Eleanor's past, her once prominent role in business, her mysterious fall from grace, but nothing prepares her for the bombshell revelation that comes later. Who is this woman? Why does everyone hate her so much? And why does Sophie feel drawn to her despite the warnings? What unfolds over the next few days is a masterclass in suspense. Sophie discovers that Eleanor isn't just any disgraced executive. She's the estranged mother of Alexander Whitmore, the man who runs the very company Sophie dreams of working for. Whitmore Enterprises is known for its ethical investment practices, a reputation Sophie deeply admires after seeing her own family lose everything to predatory banking during the 2008 financial crisis. Yet, as Sophie digs deeper, cracks begin to show beneath the shiny veneer of the company's image. Meanwhile, Eleanor reveals fragments of her story in cryptic hints, dropping clues that suggest her departure from Whitmore Enterprises wasn't voluntary, or at least not for the reasons people believe. She speaks passionately about ethics, accountability, and doing the right thing, qualities Sophie admires, but struggles to reconcile with the rumors swirling around Eleanor. Is she truly the villain everyone claims? Or is there another side to the story? As Sophie grapples with these questions, fate intervenes in the form of Alexander Whitmore himself. Tall, imposing, and impeccably dressed, he strides into the cafe. Like a force of nature, his gaze locking onto his mother with icy precision. His presence sends ripples through the room, and Sophie instinctively closes her laptop, feeling suddenly guilty for reasons she can't explain. Their interaction is tense, charged with unspoken history and simmering resentment. Alexander warns Sophie away from his mother, calling her manipulative and dangerous, while Eleanor remains eerily calm, almost amused by her son's theatrics. But the real twist comes when Alexander leaves behind a business card, inviting Sophie for an interview at Whitmore Enterprises. It's every job seeker's dream, except now Sophie knows too much. Or maybe not enough. The offer feels less like an opportunity and more like a test, one that could cost her far more than just a paycheck. The tension escalates further when Eleanor hands Sophie a napkin with an address scribbled on it. "Meet me here tomorrow," she says, "and I'll tell you why I really left Whitmore Enterprises." Sophie is torn. On one hand, there's the promise of her dream job, security, and validation for all her hard work. On the other, there's the chance to uncover the truth, to help someone who genuinely needs it, even if it means risking everything. Her decision weighs heavily on her conscience as she tosses and turns that night, staring at both the business card and the napkin like they hold the answers to two very different futures. By morning, she's made her choice. But the consequences are anything but clear. When Sophie arrives at the address Eleanor gave her, she's greeted by a modest brownstone in Brooklyn, a stark contrast to the gleaming skyscrapers of Manhattan. Inside, she finds Eleanor surrounded by filing boxes, computer equipment, and walls covered in red string, connecting photographs and financial graphs. It's like stepping into a detective novel, except this mystery involves billions of dollars and decades of corruption. Eleanor explains that 5 years ago, she discovered evidence of massive money laundering within Whitmore Enterprises, orchestrated by none other than Richard Whitmore, the founder and chairman emeritus. Confronted with the truth, Richard threatened to destroy her if she went public, while Alexander begged her to stay silent to protect the company's reputation. Eleanor chose to resign quietly, hoping her son would dismantle the operation. Instead, it continued, hidden even deeper within the corporate structure. Now, with the annual shareholder meeting just days away, Eleanor needs Sophie's help to compile irrefutable proof before it's too late. This revelation leaves Sophie reeling. Everything she thought she knew about Whitmore Enterprises and about Eleanor is turned upside down. The ethical investment strategy she admired, created by Eleanor herself, the whispers about embezzlement, a convenient lie spread to cover up the real crimes, and Alexander, caught between loyalty to his father and the truth his actions paint him as neither wholly innocent nor irredeemable. As Sophie delves into the evidence, her accounting expertise allows her to piece together a damning report detailing years of corruption disguised as corporate social responsibility. The numbers are staggering, the implications terrifying. If they take this to the authorities, it could bring down one of the most powerful men in finance. But exposing the truth comes at a price, one Sophie may not be ready to pay. Just as Sophie begins to process the enormity of what Eleanor is asking, Alexander reaches out again. His tone is different this time, urgent and tinged with desperation. He wants to meet, to hear their side of the story. Could this be a trap? Or is he finally ready to confront the sins of his family's empire? With time running out and stakes higher than ever, Sophie must decide whom to trust and how far she's willing to go to fight for justice. As the clock ticks toward the shareholder meeting, the tension builds to a breaking point. Will Sophie and Eleanor succeed in bringing the truth to light, or will the shadows of greed and power silence them forever? Stay tuned for the next chapter of this gripping tale, where courage meets consequence, and doing the right thing might just change everything, or cost them everything. As Sophie delved deeper into the evidence Eleanor had gathered, she began to understand just how vast and intricate the corruption within Whitmore Enterprises truly was. The financial documents revealed a web of deceit that stretched across continents, funneling billions through seemingly legitimate philanthropic initiatives and ethical investment programs. It was horrifyingly clever. Money laundering disguised as corporate social responsibility. For every dollar donated to charities or invested in green energy projects, there were $10 more being cleaned from illicit sources. Sophie's mind raced as she pieced together transactions, tracing patterns her professors had warned about but never imagined could exist on such a scale. Her stomach churned at the thought of how many lives this operation might have ruined. The families who lost their homes, the small businesses crushed under predatory practices, all while Whitmore Enterprises polished its image with awards for ethical leadership. Eleanor watched Sophie work, her expression unreadable, yet tinged with something like pride. "You see now," she said softly one evening, breaking the silence between them. "Why I couldn't stay silent, why I had to leave everything behind." Sophie nodded, though her hands trembled slightly as she organized another set of files. She understood now why Eleanor had been ostracized, not because she was guilty, but because she refused to be complicit. Yet the weight of what they were doing pressed heavily on both women. If Alexander discovered what they were compiling, if Richard found out before they went public, the consequences would be catastrophic. And even if they succeeded, exposing the truth meant destroying reputations, dismantling decades of carefully constructed lies. Would the world believe them, or would Richard's power shield him once again? Meanwhile, Sophie's decision to reject Alexander's job offer gnawed at her. On paper, it seemed insane, turning down security and validation for uncertainty and danger. But every time doubt crept in, she remembered her parents' faces during the 2008 financial crisis, her father's defeated slump after losing his job, her mother's exhaustion juggling 2 minimum wage positions. They weren't numbers on a spreadsheet. They were real people whose lives had been upended by greed. And now, sitting amidst piles of incriminating evidence, Sophie realized she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone like her family, for the countless others betrayed by systems designed to exploit them. Still, the fear lingered. What if she failed? What if all this effort only made things worse? Alexander, meanwhile, wrestled with his own demons. After confronting his father about the ongoing money laundering scheme, he'd spent sleepless nights poring over the records Eleanor had hinted at. Each transaction confirmed his worst fears. Not only had Richard continued the illegal operations, but he'd expanded them. Worse, Alexander's initial attempts to contain the situation 5 years ago had inadvertently allowed the corruption to fester unchecked. The guilt weighed on him, manifesting in restless pacing and clenched fists. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he also couldn't ignore the present. His loyalty to his father warred with his duty to protect the company and perhaps redeem himself. For the first time in years, he considered reaching out to Eleanor, not as an adversary, but as someone seeking guidance. The tension reached a boiling point when Alexander called another meeting, this time insisting both Sophie and Eleanor attend. The venue was a private dining room at an upscale restaurant, far removed from prying eyes. As they sat across from each other, mother and son, estranged yet bound by blood, Sophie felt the air crackle with unspoken emotions. Alexander began, cautiously, explaining that he'd verified Eleanor's claims and uncovered additional evidence implicating Richard. "I'm going to expose him," he declared, his voice steady, despite the tremor beneath. Before the shareholder meeting, tomorrow, Eleanor's eyes widened, surprise mingling with skepticism. "Why now?" she asked pointedly. Because I can't keep protecting him, Alexander replied, his tone raw. And because you were right about everything. For a moment, the room fell silent, except for the faint clinking of silverware in the background. Sophie glanced between mother and son, sensing the fragile truce forming between them. Yet, questions remained. Could Alexander really follow through on his promise? Or was this another attempt to control the narrative, to protect the Whitmore name at any cost? Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze piercing. If you're serious, she said, then let us help you. Together we can ensure the truth comes out in full. Alexander hesitated, then nodded slowly. It was a risky alliance, fraught with mistrust and old wounds, but it was also their best chance to dismantle the empire Richard had built on deception. Back at Eleanor's brownstone, the three worked feverishly to finalize their report. Sophie compiled data into digestible charts and summaries, while Eleanor provided context and insights gleaned from her years as CFO. Alexander reviewed legal precedents and strategized how to present the case to authorities without triggering immediate retaliation. Despite their progress, the looming deadline cast a shadow over everything. Every knock at the door sent Sophie's heart racing. Every phone vibration made her jump. She knew they were running out of time. Tomorrow's shareholder meeting would either seal their victory or mark the beginning of their downfall. As dawn broke on the day of the meeting, Sophie stood by the window, watching the city wake up below. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and anxious. Across the room, Eleanor sipped tea, her posture rigid with anticipation. Alexander paced, muttering to himself as he rehearsed key points. None of them spoke much. They didn't need to. The stakes were clear. Within hours, they would confront Richard Whitmore in front of the board, armed with irrefutable proof of his crimes. Success meant justice, reform, and redemption. Failure meant ruin, exile, and possibly worse. As they prepared to leave, Eleanor placed a hand on Sophie's shoulder. Whatever happens today, she said quietly, remember why we're doing this. Not for revenge, but for integrity. Sophie nodded, swallowing hard. Then together, they stepped out into the uncertain morning light, ready to face whatever came next. The meeting with Alexander marked a turning point, but Sophie and Eleanor knew the battle was far from over. As they prepared for the shareholder meeting the next day, the weight of what they were about to do pressed heavily on them. The evidence was undeniable, but exposing it meant taking on one of the most powerful men in finance, Richard Whitmore. For Eleanor, it meant risking everything she had worked for over decades. For Sophie, it meant sacrificing her dream job and stepping into a world of uncertainty. But both women understood that silence was no longer an option. The morning of the shareholder meeting arrived, and the atmosphere at Whitmore Enterprises was electric with tension. Reporters milled about outside, drawn by rumors of internal conflict and potential scandal. Inside the boardroom, Richard Whitmore sat confidently at the head of the table, flanked by his loyal executives. Alexander stood nearby, his expression unreadable. When Eleanor entered the room, leaning slightly on Sophie's arm, the murmurs began. Richard's face darkened as he stared at his ex-wife, his jaw tightening. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Eleanor didn't flinch. With quiet authority, she laid out the evidence they had compiled. The recordings, the financial documents, the patterns of corruption stretching back years. Sophie followed, translating the complex data into clear, damning terms that even the least financially savvy person could understand. The room fell silent as the truth unfolded before them. One by one, Board members exchanged glances, their discomfort palpable. Some looked angry, others betrayed, but none could deny the irrefutable proof. Alexander stepped forward then, his voice steady, but tinged with emotion. "I've spent my life believing in this company, in its mission, in my father's vision," he said, addressing the stunned group. "But I can no longer stand by while that mission is corrupted from within." He turned to face Richard, his eyes filled with resolve. "Dad, you've built incredible things, but you've also destroyed lives. It ends today." The confrontation between father and son was raw and painful to witness. Richard tried to defend himself, accusing Eleanor of betrayal and Sophie of manipulation, but his words lacked conviction. The board, now fully aware of the depth of his crimes, voted unanimously to strip him of his title and hand over all evidence to the authorities. As security escorted Richard out of the building, Sophie felt a mix of relief and disbelief. They had done it. They had exposed the truth. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was immense. Richard Whitmore faced multiple charges, including fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. The media coverage was relentless, painting him as the architect of one of the largest corporate scandals in recent history. Meanwhile, Whitmore Enterprises underwent sweeping reforms under Alexander's leadership. Eleanor returned to the company, not as CFO, but as a special advisor, tasked with ensuring ethical practices were upheld at every level. Her presence signaled a new era for the company, one rooted in transparency and accountability. Sophie joined the newly formed compliance team, working closely with Eleanor to implement rigorous oversight measures. It wasn't the glamorous role she'd initially envisioned, but it was infinitely more meaningful. Together, they reviewed policies, trained employees, and built systems designed to prevent future corruption. Sophie found fulfillment in knowing that her work directly contributed to protecting people like her parents, ordinary individuals who deserved honesty and fairness from the institutions they trusted. As the dust settled, Sophie reflected on how drastically her life had changed since that fateful day in the cafe. What began as a simple act of kindness had spiraled into a journey of courage, sacrifice, and redemption. She thought often about Eleanor's words. "Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, but sometimes the world surprises you by rewarding integrity." Those words had carried her through moments of doubt and fear, reminding her why she had chosen this path. One evening, months after the scandal broke, Sophie and Eleanor met for dinner at a small restaurant near the brownstone. Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, they talked about the future. Eleanor shared her plans to mentor young accountants, teaching them the importance of ethics in finance. Sophie spoke excitedly about upcoming projects aimed at expanding the company's community outreach programs. Both women laughed when Eleanor teased Sophie about her growing confidence, noting how far she'd come from the nervous girl clutching her laptop in the cafe. Before leaving, Eleanor handed Sophie a small box wrapped in delicate paper. Inside was a pair of pearl earrings, the same ones Eleanor had worn during their first meeting. "For someone whose moral compass points true," she said with a smile. Sophie blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the gesture. "Thank you," she whispered, slipping the earrings into her pocket. "I'll wear them always." Walking home that night, Sophie felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for where she was now, but for the journey that had brought her here. She realized that life rarely followed the paths we imagined, but sometimes those detours led us exactly where we were meant to be. And as she passed by the cafe where it all began, she paused for a moment, smiling at the memory of two unlikely allies who had dared to stand for what was right, no matter the cost.